Dodger Stadium, home to the Los Angeles Dodgers, or actually, who was it home to? Dodger Stadium is in the heart of downtown Los Angeles, but before it became a destination for hundreds of passionate baseball fans, it was home to families like the Arechigas. On a day in May of 1959, families saw their homes, places where they built their whole life, be destroyed by bulldozers. Chavez Ravine was built on the grounds of three low-income neighborhoods, Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. The people who lived in these areas were primarily Mexican American and Mexican immigrants. The city of Los Angeles forcibly evicted close to 300 families from their property to build the stadium after a trade with the then called Brooklyn Dodgers. This wasn't the plan, or at least what the city told these families. These families, who lived on the property that was sold, were promised a new home in what was supposed to be a low-income public housing project. However, this is not what came knocking on their door. Many families indeed did sell their property and left, but some families stayed until they physically couldn't. One of those families was the Arechigas. In the May 9, 1959 edition of La Opinion, the physical eviction of the Arechiga family was documented and reported on. As we see, the Spanish-speaking newspaper talked about the event in a way that framed the voices of those who were suffering and framed the story of Chavez Ravine in a way that showcased how the actions of the Arechigas were acts of resistance. For example, they said, "Evicted by force, the Los Angeles County Police went yesterday to dispossess a family of 11 that was holding firm in their home in Chavez Ravine." This is in stark contrast to the way that the Los Angeles Times covered the event. By using these two primary sources, we can identify that the difference in coverage and how families like the Arechigas are portrayed show the moment in time we are talking about. The historical context of the early 1960s show that this was a time where immigration, specifically Mexican immigration, was rising. More migrants were coming to the country than ever before, and with them came the formation of ethnic enclaves. These ethnic enclaves, or barrios, held a lot of significance. The story of Chavez Ravine goes beyond simply just being about land. These three neighborhoods represented a community of a population that either barely arrived in the States or were made up of first and second generation of Mexican families. If we compare the difference in coverage, it makes sense why a mainstream newspaper would avoid using wording that emphasizes how authorities force families out, or words like gritos desafiantes, which means defiant screams, or the repetition of the word by force. Back then, although small, La Opinion catered to the community this event affected. Therefore, the support and mobilization this coverage would create within this community is important to note. In comparison, the Los Angeles Times uses words like screaming woman removed and melee, which holds a negative connotation. The way the displacement is reported on is much different than La Opinion. Here, they write, according to the city attorney Roger Arnenberg, the Arechigas have been occupying the property rent-free since 1953. They additionally identify the evictions as a skirmish and screech in defiance. Although vocabulary or reports like this may seem simple, they hold weight. The pictures of the Arechigas being forcibly taken away from their home became viral and are still relevant to this day. As the images show, the way the Arechigas were portrayed to mainstream society was very different. In this time, the racialization of Mexican families were forming. The stereotypes of Mexicans being seen as criminals, dirty, disobedient, and other things of negative nature was spreading. Furthermore, the fact that this is how a mainstream newspaper like the Los Angeles Times portrayed them as follows a pattern of a racialized identity. Experiences have permanently affected how families like the Arechigas have lived. Melissa Arechiga tells La Opinion in 2016 that it was a place where people of color could live, as was the case with African Americans. Hispanics were excluded from certain communities because people with high incomes did not want them around them. It was a place that no one wanted to go, and that the government left for the Mexicans. As said before, these neighborhoods were seen as a safe haven for communities of color. For this reason, being evicted and displaced in this manner carries volumes. The Arechiga family, to this day, still work hard to combat issues of gentrification that target and primarily hurt communities of color. For example, family members have created an organization called Buried Under the Blue, whose mission is to honor their family members who were taken out of their homes. They said that their mission is to preserve our history of our three destroyed communities of Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop through an indigenous platform bridging the public to the past and present through historical context, oral history, education, community services, community building, environmental justice, and technology. These sources show the story of this family and that of other families, but it also shows how not everyone knows the real story or the fact that these families are generationally still affected to this day. The sources also demonstrate the way the stories like this can be painted in different ways based on who is covering or which community they are being catered to. It speaks volumes about the period, but it also is something that we see to this day. The story of the Arechigas and what happened at Chavez Ravine illustrates how a community was seen as a disposable for profit, but we can also see how their story, through Buried Under the Blue, demonstrates how these communities, when mobilized and united, can use their voice to create change.